7 theories about rocks, XEBEC in One Piece. Today I'm bringing you a video where we're going to talk about some of the most popular and craziest theories about the character Rock's XEBEC, and specifically 7 of them. I might repeat this kind of section with other characters in the future, so let me know down in the comments who you'd like to see in the next episode. Remember, if you enjoy this kind of video, you can hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel to help me reach 5,000 subscribers and make my dream come true. Alright, I'll shut up now. Let's get started. When we talk about Rock's XEBEC, we're talking about a name that carries an enormous weight in the One Piece world. Even though we don't know his full face, even though we've barely seen him directly on screen, his presence feels massive. This guy was the captain of the most insane pirate crew in history. Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shiki, Captain John, literal monsters of the seas all under the same flag. So the theory that he might still be alive? Yeah, that's the kind of idea that instantly shakes the entire fan base. But is it just a wild guess, or is there actually solid ground to believe it? Here's where the whole thing starts making sense. First of all, the way Oda has been handling the information around Rocks is just too deliberate. For decades inside the story timeline, nobody ever really talked about him. Even among legends like Roger and Garp, his name wasn't tossed around that much. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we get the God Valley incident revealed. 38 years ago, supposedly, this dude disappears, along with the island itself, after a legendary battle between his crew and the alliance of Garp and Roger. But the problem is, we never actually saw him die. No body, no flashback of his defeat, nothing concrete. In One Piece, if there's no body, there's always room for questions. Now, let's zoom in on the importance of this. Think about how much time passed before we ever heard about Rocks. Up until the Wano arc, the name Rock's XEBEC was just absent from the narrative, and even when it finally showed up, it wasn't just a casual name drop. The way Sengoku explained it in Marineford felt like Oda saying, hey, this is important, remember this. But the weird part, when we get the God Valley incident explained, the focus isn't really on Rocks himself. It's on Garp becoming the hero of the Marines. It's on Roger and Garp teaming up. Big Mom and Kaido are mentioned too, sure, but Rocks? Again, barely anything. And that's exactly why the theory of him still being alive makes sense. Why bring up this dude so late in the story if his only purpose is background lore? Why keep his face hidden? Why keep teasing his name here and there, in Kuma's flashback, in mentions by Blackbeard, but never giving the full picture? Oda knows how to close a story arc when he wants to. He knows how to kill a character off properly if their role is done. But with Rocks, it feels like every time we're about to get answers, Oda pulls the curtain down again. The way One Piece handles dead characters has a pattern. You can usually tell when Oda wants to leave a door open. Look at characters like Sabo, Pell, or even Bon Clay. If you don't see a body, it's not over. But more importantly, Oda only puts that kind of narrative attention on people who are still gonna play a part in the story. Rocks hasn't even been given a full proper flashback yet. We've seen glimpses, shadows, and silhouettes, but never the man himself. And when Oda keeps a face hidden, oh, you know it means something. It's a classic move from him. It's the same thing he did with Emu for so long. We only saw the silhouette, the mystery kept building, and we knew that the payoff would come later. Another thing that adds fuel to this theory is the way Rocks has been talked about by other characters. Whenever someone mentions him, it's with this mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity. Even Sengoku didn't talk about him like, oh yeah, he's long gone, no worries. Instead, it feels like they're still kinda haunted by the guy. And let's be real, this was a man strong enough to hold the likes of Kaido, Big Mom, and Whitebeard under his command. That's not someone you just erase from history without a trace. But if he's alive, where the hell is he? Why hasn't he shown up in all this time? Well, that's where things get interesting. If we assume Rock survived God Valley, there's a decent chance he's been hiding, biding his time. And here's the thing, the Marines and the world government wanted his name erased. They didn't just beat him, they wanted him forgotten. His name was scrubbed from history books. That's not normal treatment, even for a pirate. The government doesn't usually care that much about just deleting names. They didn't erase Roger's name, for example. But with Rocks, they went full blackout mode. That suggests that his ideology, his goal of becoming king of the world, scared the absolute hell out of the celestial dragons and the world government. And let's not forget one of the key lines about Rocks, that he was the pirate who dared to challenge the world itself, that he wanted not just to be the pirate king, but the ruler of everything. That kind of ambition doesn't die easy. It's not something you let go of just because your crew fell apart. If he's alive, he's probably still carrying that same dream, and if he is alive, then you can bet Oda's saving him for the absolute endgame. Think about how Wano ended. Kaido and Big Mom are out of the picture. At least for now, the Yonko system is crumbling. Blackbeard is making his move. The world government is on the defensive with the revolutionaries pushing hard, and Emu finally stepping into the light. If there's ever been a perfect moment for a final boss figure like Rox to emerge from the shadows, it's now. And here's another angle that makes the theory even more compelling. Blackbeard. We know Blackbeard has a weird obsession with history. His ship is literally called the Saber of XEBEC. That's not a random choice. And Blackbeard's whole deal is picking up the pieces left behind by others. Whitebeard's fruit stolen, his own ship and flag, named after Rox. His obsession with darkness and chaos. Feels a lot like he's walking the same path that Rox once walked. So here's the question. Does Blackbeard know something we don't? Has he been in contact with Rox? Or maybe even working under him without fully realizing it? Or could it be that Blackbeard is just the next generation of the same nightmare that Rox once represented? Now, let's talk logistics for a second. How old would Rox be right now? Well, if the God Valley incident was 38 years ago, and if we assume he was at least in his 30s or 40s at that time, that puts him somewhere in his 70s or 80s now. But hey, look at Garp, look at Sengoku, look at Rayleigh. Old doesn't mean weak in One Piece. In fact, the old guys tend to be absolute monsters. So Rox showing up as an old but terrifying figure, totally within the realm of possibility. But here's the real kicker. If he's still alive, it explains why Oda hasn't shown his face. You don't hide someone's face in flashbacks for no reason, especially not someone this important. If he was only going to appear in flashbacks, there's no reason to keep the mystery going. But if he's going to appear in the present timeline, oh, now it makes sense. Now we understand why Oda's holding that card so close to his chest. There's also this little meta detail that fans love to bring up. Oda said years ago that he has a surprise plan that will shake the entire One Piece world. Some people thought it was Gear 5. Some thought it was Joy Boy stuff. But what if part of that surprise is the return of Rox D. XEBEC? What if he's not a piece of the past, but a player in the final conflict? The theory doesn't just rely on wishful thinking. It's backed by the way Oda has handled this character narratively. Every choice, from the way Rox was introduced, to the lack of face reveals, to the constant teasing without payoff, feels like setup, like Oda's laying the groundwork for something massive. And given how much the world government fears history, it fits perfectly that their biggest nightmare, the man who once tried to rule the world, might still be out there. There's also the symbolic side of it. One Piece is a story about inherited will, dreams that don't die, even when the dreamers do. But what if sometimes the dreamer doesn't die either? What if Rox represents the literal continuation of his own will? It would flip the whole inherited will concept on its head. Everyone's been inheriting the will of D as Luffy, Roger, Dragon, Law, Blackbeard. But Rox? Maybe he doesn't need anyone to inherit it because he never let it go in the first place. If that's true, then we might be looking at the true final antagonist of One Piece. Not Blackbeard, not Emu, but Rox D. XEBEC himself stepping out from the shadows one last time to finish what he started. And honestly, that would be one hell of a payoff. So here's the deal with one of the wildest but also most entertaining theories about Rox D. XEBEC. The idea that the reason Oda hasn't shown his face yet is because there's something way too obvious about it. Something that would instantly make every fan, even the most casual ones, go, wait, what? The theory is simple but has massive implications. Rox D. XEBEC could actually be the father of Buggy the Clown. I know, it sounds nuts at first, like some gag tier speculation, but let's be real here. Oda has always played with these kinds of tricks where something that seems like a joke turns out to be serious, or at least has a deeper purpose. If you take a second to really think about it, this theory has a surprising amount of logic behind it, and that's what makes it so much fun to unpack. It's not just about the surface level Buggy is a joke character, haha. It's about how Oda builds hype, mystery, and payoff into the very DNA of One Piece, and this theory fits right into that structure like a glove. First off, let's talk about one of the most important details that supports this theory. Rock's face has never been shown, not once. And in One Piece, when a character's face is hidden for that long, especially when that character is supposedly dead or from the past, it's always for a reason. Oda doesn't just hide faces for fun. He does it because the reveal would either spoil something major or because the face itself itself means something. And here's the kicker: if Rox's face is hidden because it looks too much like Buggy's, specifically the iconic red nose, then suddenly it all clicks into place. Why is Buggy's nose such a big deal in the series? Because it's not just a visual gag. Oda constantly reminds us of it. Every time someone insults him, every time someone describes him, it's always about the nose. Red nose this, clown nose that. It's literally the most recognizable thing about him, and it's not just for laughs. Oda doesn't repeat things for no reason. When a joke is this consistent across 1,000 chapters, it's telling you there's something deeper behind it. Think about it. Buggy's nose has been mentioned so much that it's almost weird how obsessed the narrative is with it. And if Rox also had a big red clown nose, man, that would explain the mystery immediately. The fans would lose their minds. Now, let's get into why it would make story sense. Buggy has always been treated as a joke in the series, but the crazy thing is, he keeps climbing the ladder of power anyway. First he's just some side villain in Orange Town, then he's at Logue Town, crossing paths with Luffy again. Fast forward, and he's at Marineford, somehow surviving in the middle of the most dangerous war we've seen. After the war, he gets his own crew boosted by ex-prisoners from Impel Down. Then, out of nowhere, he becomes one of the Shichibukai, and now, Yonko's status. Yonko, the guy who trips over his own shoes and gets his ass kicked every other appearance, is sitting at the top table with people like Blackbeard, Luffy, and Shanks. You could argue it's just Oda making fun of him, but here's the thing: what if that's the point? What if Buggy's entire joke, the "I'm not actually strong, I'm just lucky" bit, is actually part of his bloodline? What if the reason Buggy keeps failing upward is because he's inherited not just Rox's blood, but maybe even his insane luck or charisma? Because let's be honest, commanding a crew like Rox did wasn't about brute strength alone. You don't gather Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shiki, and Captain John on one ship unless you're damn good at manipulation, leadership, or sheer presence. And Buggy, despite all his flaws, somehow has that same magnetism. People follow him. Even Mihawk and Crocodile are stuck on the same ship as him right now, whether they like it or not. Imagine the narrative punch if Buggy's entire life of accidental success is the result of him being the son of the most dangerous pirate in history. It would add this tragic but hilarious layer to Buggy's story. Like, he was always meant to be important, but he never knew it. Or worse, maybe he does know, deep down, and he's just running from it, because how the hell do you live up to something like that? If your dad was the guy who tried to become the king of the world and nearly burned the whole system down, wouldn't you want to be a nobody? Wouldn't you want to hide behind clown makeup and dumb jokes instead of facing that legacy head on? It would also explain why Oda is playing this weird long game with Buggy's character arc. Because even though Buggy's been comic relief for so long, every once in a while we get these moments where you can tell there's more going on under the surface. Like when he talks about Roger. Buggy sailed on the same ship as Shanks under Gold D. Roger. That's not small potatoes. Roger didn't just pick up random clowns off the street. There was something about Buggy that made him worthy of being on that crew, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't because of skill, but because of who his father was. Now here's where things get even crazier. There's this whole speculation about the D in One Piece, the will of D, the people who carry it, the ones who are destined to bring about the great upheaval. Buggy doesn't have the D initial in his name as far as we know. But what if that's another reason why Oda's kept Rox's face and full identity secret? Because if Rox had a red nose and was confirmed as Buggy's father, we'd instantly start asking, does that mean Buggy also carries the D? Is he Buggy D Clown? That would be such an Oda move, honestly. A complete subversion of expectations. Everyone's expecting the D Clan to be these big, heroic, powerful figures. But here's Buggy, the ultimate underdog, the living meme, quietly carrying the D without anyone knowing. It would be the biggest twist and one of the most poetic plays Oda could pull. Plus, think about how Buggy's path mirrors so much of what we know about the Rox pirates. Rox was all about chaos. He wasn't interested in the Pirate King title like Roger. He wanted world domination, total control, but at the same time, his crew was a mess. All these huge egos forced to work together, barely held in line by Rox's leadership. Buggy's Cross Guild? Kind of the same energy, right? Mihawk and Crocodile have their own goals. They're not really following Buggy because they believe in him. They're just stuck in the chaos, but somehow Buggy holds the center. Even by accident, he's the glue that keeps it all together. Sounds familiar? Yeah, that's the Rocks dynamic all over again. What's even more fascinating is how Oda could use this reveal to deepen Buggy's character in a way that still keeps his comedy intact. Imagine the reveal happening not in some epic battle, but in a moment of complete disaster for Buggy. Like he's running away from a fight, someone insults his nose again, and then out of nowhere, a major character drops the bomb. You look just like your father. And when Buggy freaks out, trying to deny it, the truth spills out piece by piece. Maybe there are records, maybe someone like Garp, Sengoku, or even an ex-member of the Rocks crew confirms it. And in classic Oda fashion, the reveal would be dramatic, funny, and devastating all at the same time. This also opens up so many doors for the endgame of One Piece, because if Buggy is Rocks' son, that gives him a direct tie to the final conflicts of the series. It puts him right into the middle of the power struggle, whether he wants it or not. Suddenly the Marines, the world government, and even Blackbeard would have a reason to take him seriously. He wouldn't just be a clown anymore. He'd be the heir of the most dangerous pirate who ever lived, and the irony is that he'd probably be the last person who wants that responsibility. But if there's one thing One Piece loves, it's forcing characters to confront their destiny whether they're ready for it or not. Luffy is Joy Boy, whether he knows it or not. Law carries the D and has been dragged into the D legacy. Even Blackbeard, with all his scheming, might be a puppet of fate more than he realizes. Buggy stepping into that same spotlight, the spotlight he's been dodging his whole life, would be the ultimate punchline and the ultimate payoff. Another little breadcrumb worth mentioning, the constant parallels between Buggy and Shanks. They started on the same ship, had the same opportunities, but went in completely different directions. Shanks became the respected Yonko, the cool-headed, powerful leader. Buggy became the joke, but imagine how brutal that would feel if Buggy always knew that his bloodline was actually more infamous than Shanks. If deep down he's been carrying this weight, this legacy he never wanted, while watching Shanks rise without that kind of burden, it adds a whole new layer to their relationship. Maybe Shanks knows the truth, maybe he doesn't. But either way, the contrast between them gets way more interesting if Buggy is the one tied directly to Rocks. And here's where Oda could really go wild with the payoff, because if Buggy has that connection, it could also give him a sudden moment of true importance when the world starts falling apart. Maybe it's not about him fighting the final battle or becoming Pirate King. Maybe it's about him being the unexpected key to stopping something or unlocking a piece of the lost history. Oda loves to hide serious plot points behind the funny characters. Hell, the whole series is named after a joke. One Piece sounds like a goofy name, but the treasure at the center of it all could be the biggest truth in the world. So wrapping it all together, the theory that Rocks XEBEC is Buggy's father isn't just some silly haha clown nose joke. It actually fits right into the structure of how One Piece tells its story. The consistent nose gag, the hidden face of Rocks, the weird way Buggy keeps rising in power, the parallels between him and the Rocks crew, the potential D-connection, it all builds up to something that feels totally possible in Oda's world. And honestly, if this turns out to be true, it would be one of the greatest narrative twists in One Piece history. Equal parts funny, tragic, and brilliant. Exactly the kind of twist Oda loves to hit us with when we least expect it. One of the most talked about theories when it comes to Rocks XEBEC, and honestly one that makes a scary amount of sense if you sit down and really think about it, is the idea that Rocks was actually the original user of the Yami no Mi, the same darkness fruit that Blackbeard has right now. This isn't just random speculation pulled out of thin air either. This theory ties directly into the core themes of One Piece, and the weird parallels between Blackbeard and Rocks that have been sprinkled throughout the series. The more you dig into it, the more it starts feeling like Oda has been leaving these little breadcrumbs for us all along, and this theory just connects the dots in a way that honestly feels too perfect to ignore. So let's break down why this would make sense. First, you have to look at Blackbeard's obsession with the Yami no Mi. This guy spent decades playing the long game inside Whitebeard's crew, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the exact moment to snatch this fruit. And the moment he got it, he treated it like it was the ultimate prize. Like this was the key to everything he's ever wanted. That's not normal. We've seen people hunt for powerful fruits in One Piece before, but the way Blackbeard talks about the Yami no Mi is different. He says things like, "This fruit chose me," and acts Rocks like it's his destiny. There's a deeper connection between him and this fruit that feels spiritual, almost religious. But what if that connection isn't just about fate or will? What if that fruit used to belong to someone he idolizes, someone whose dream he's carrying forward? That's where Rocks comes in. Remember that Blackbeard's ship is literally called the Saber of XEBEC. He didn't name it after Whitebeard. He didn't name it after Roger. He named it after Rocks XEBEC, a pirate from a generation before his time. That's not some casual name drop. That's straight up homage. And considering how obsessed Blackbeard is with history, with learning the true nature of the world, with inheriting the wrong kind of will, it makes total sense that he would follow in Rocks' footsteps. But here's the thing, if Rocks was the original Yami user, that would explain so much about both of their stories. The Yami no Mi is not just any Logia, it's unique. Instead of giving you the usual elemental intangibility like fire, ice, or smoke, it makes you a black hole. You still take damage like a normal person, but in return, you can absorb and cancel out other devil fruit powers. That ability alone is a terrifying concept, but paired with the fact that Blackbeard also figured out how to hold two fruits at the same time, something that should be impossible, it all starts to feel like he's following a blueprint that Rocks may have already discovered. Think about what we know about Rocks. The dude was ambitious enough to want to rule the world, not just be the pirate king. He wasn't out there for the same reasons as Roger or Whitebeard. His goal wasn't freedom or glory or family. He wanted domination, control, the throne of the entire world. That's literally what the Yami no Mi is all about at its core. The power to absorb, suppress, and dominate other abilities. Symbolically, it fits Rocks like a glove. This is not a fruit for someone who wants to coexist with others. This is a fruit for someone who wants to take away the power of everyone around him and leave them powerless beneath his shadow. Now, let's connect this to the narrative of God Valley. If Rocks really did have the Yami no Mi, it makes total sense why the world government would be so desperate to erase every trace of him. They didn't just defeat him, they tried to wipe him from the history books entirely. That's next level erasure, and we know that the world government only goes to that extent when someone is seriously dangerous. Not just strong, but dangerous to the balance of the entire system. Think about O'Hara and the scholars trying to uncover the Void Century. Same deal. When the government goes full blackout mode, it's because they're scared of what people might learn. If Rocks had the Yami no Mi, and if he was already learning about the true history of the world, maybe even chasing the secrets of the ancient weapons or the Void Century, that would explain why the government was so terrified of him. A guy with that kind of destructive power combined with forbidden knowledge. He's the ultimate threat to the world government, and if he was really looking to control or overthrow the celestial dragons, that darkness fruit would have been the perfect tool for it. There's also the creepy symbolism of the Yami no Mi itself. It's darkness, it's the void, it's literally described as the fruit of darkness. Oda is not the type of writer to just slap on names like that for no reason. Everything in One Piece has layers of meaning, and what better fruit to give the guy whose ambition was to cast his shadow over the entire world. The darkness fruit doesn't just give Rocks power, it matches his ideology perfectly. Then there's Blackbeard's line about the fruit choosing him. If the Yami no Mi had a previous owner as powerful as Rocks, that phrase takes on a whole new meaning. Maybe the fruit retains some of the will of its previous users. Maybe the fruit is drawn to certain kinds of people who share the same twisted ambition. That would also explain why Blackbeard is able to use the fruit so effectively right out of the gate. He's not just another random user. He's someone who understands what the fruit was designed for, someone who's studied the life of its previous owner, maybe even learned tricks from Rocks' legacy. It also gives a lot more weight to Blackbeard's obsession with eating a second devil fruit, because let's not forget, Rocks was surrounded by monsters. Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shiki. You think a guy like that would settle for being on the same level as his subordinates? Hell no. If there was anyone crazy enough to experiment with multiple fruits back in the day, it would be Rocks. But maybe the reason the world believes it's impossible is because the one guy who figured it out got wiped out before he could pass the knowledge on. That would make Blackbeard the inheritor not just of Rocks' will, but also of his methods, his strategy, maybe even his research. This is where the theory gets even deeper, because if you assume Rocks had the Yami no Mi, and if you assume he was messing with the idea of multiple devil fruits, then Blackbeard's entire plan suddenly makes sense as a continuation of that same vision. Blackbeard didn't just stumble into these ideas, he's following the same path, picking up where Rox left off, refining the plan with the benefit of more knowledge and less chaos. While Rox was a brute force leader, gathering powerful pirates and forcing them under one flag, Blackbeard is the sneaky, strategic version of that same dream. It's also worth considering the design of the Rox Jolly Roger. That skull with the weird aura around it, people have pointed out how much it looks like it's surrounded by dark energy or shadows. That's not the usual skull and crossbones design. It feels intentional, like it's hinting at the darkness power that Rox might have wielded. If Oda wanted to leave a symbol of Rox's true power without outright saying it, the Jolly Roger design would be the perfect place to hide that clue. This theory also helps explain the obsession Blackbeard has with Hachinosu, the pirate island. That place used to be the base of operations for the Rox pirates. Blackbeard didn't just take over a random island, he claimed the exact same spot where Rox built his empire. That's not coincidence. That's Blackbeard following in his footsteps deliberately. And if you think about it, why would Blackbeard care so much about Rox in the first place if there wasn't some direct link between them? Naming his ship after Rox, taking over Rox's old base, hunting the same devil fruit. It all points to Blackbeard seeing himself as Rox's successor, not Whitebeard's, not Roger's, Rox's. But here's one of the most fascinating parts of the theory. It flips the whole idea of inherited will on its head. Up until now, we've been taught that inherited will in One Piece is mostly about the good guys. Roger's will inherited by Luffy, Oden's will carried by Momonosuke. But what if will can be inherited by villains too? What if Rock's will of domination, chaos, and absolute control didn't die with him? It got passed on to Blackbeard through the fruit, through knowledge, through legacy. That would make the final confrontation between Luffy and Blackbeard not just about pirates fighting for treasure, but about two opposing inherited wills clashing for the future of the world. And that's what makes this theory so satisfying. It doesn't just explain why Blackbeard wanted the Yami no Mi so badly. It connects it to the larger story of One Piece. It ties Blackbeard to the past in a way that gives him real weight as an antagonist, not just as some power-hungry pirate, but as the living embodiment of the chaos that Rox once tried to unleash. It also opens the door for some wild future flashbacks. Imagine finally getting the full God Valley backstory, and instead of just seeing Rox as some generic bad guy, we see him wielding the darkness, crushing his enemies, absorbing their powers, pushing the limits of devil fruit abilities. And then imagine the terror on Garp and Roger's faces, not just because of Rox's army, but because of the horror of the darkness itself. That would make the Battle of God Valley not just a showdown between pirates and marines, but a battle against literal darkness, the same darkness that Blackbeard now controls. If Oda decides to confirm this theory, it would elevate Blackbeard from being the sneaky guy with two fruits to being the inheritor of the most dangerous pirate dream in history, and it would explain why Blackbeard feels like such a uniquely dangerous threat compared to anyone else Luffy has faced. He wouldn't just be another obstacle on the way to the One Piece, he'd be the full evolution of the nightmare that Rox once was. And honestly, that would make Blackbeard the perfect final antagonist, because it wouldn't just be Luffy fighting a guy with crazy powers. It would be Luffy fighting the ultimate representation of domination, control, and darkness. The exact opposite of everything the D-Clan stands for. The exact opposite of Roger's dream of freedom. So yeah, at first this theory sounds like just a fun what if, but the more you dig into it, the more it feels like it could be the real deal. The Yami no Mi wasn't just sitting around waiting for Blackbeard by accident. It was part of a legacy, a curse maybe, a will of its own. And Blackbeard, he's the one crazy enough, ambitious enough, and ruthless enough to pick it up and keep running with it. If that's true, then we haven't just been watching Blackbeard's rise to power. We've been watching the rebirth of Rox XEBEC's dream, wearing a new face, holding the same darkness. And that makes the endgame of One Piece so much more intense than just a race for treasure. It makes it a battle for the soul of the entire world. The fourth theory about Rox XEBEC suggests something pretty wild, but also fascinating if you stop and think about how devil fruits and souls work in the world of One Piece. The idea is that Rox might have been the original user of the Yomi no Mi, the revive fruit, the exact same one that Brook has today. This isn't just a casual, oh maybe he had this fruit type of theory. This idea digs deep into how the mechanics of death, devil fruits, and souls function in the story, and it uses that logic to suggest suggests that Rox might not have truly died at God Valley. Instead, he might have ended up in a situation similar to Brooks, but way darker, with his soul lingering around without being able to return to his body because that body was either destroyed or sunk at the bottom of the sea. What makes this theory so interesting is that it doesn't rely on simple wishful thinking like maybe he escaped. It uses the canon rules we already know. The Yomi no Mi allows its user to come back to life after death, but it doesn't just magic the body back into perfect condition. If the body is inaccessible, like in Brooks' case where he couldn't find his body for years, the soul can be left wandering, stuck in limbo, unable to properly return to the physical world. That's why Brooke came back as a skeleton. The power was still active, but the body was too far gone. Now, imagine Rox in that exact same situation, but under much worse circumstances. God Valley wasn't just any battle, it was absolute chaos. We know the island supposedly disappeared or was destroyed completely. If Rox's body was crushed, sunk, or otherwise obliterated during the fight, then even if the Yomi no Mi activated like it was supposed to, his soul wouldn't have been able to return. But just like Brooke, that wouldn't have meant true death. It would have meant a wandering soul, a spirit stuck between life and death, with all that rage, ambition, and hatred festering for nearly 40 years. Now, here's where things start to get really crazy. Think about the willpower someone like Rox must have had to lead monsters like Kaido, Big Mom, and Whitebeard. This wasn't some small-time pirate who stumbled into power. This was a man with charisma, force, and vision strong enough to command the most dangerous pirates of his generation. If someone like that became a soul trapped in the world, you can bet that soul wouldn't just float around quietly. We're talking about the kind of spirit that could manipulate, influence, and maybe even possess. This isn't your average ghost story. This is the soul of one of the most terrifying figures in the world, refusing to die, refusing to let go of his dream. The big question here is whether this would even be possible within the logic of One Piece. But if you really look at the details, Oda has already laid down the groundwork for this to make sense. Souls and life force are actual, tangible things in the One Piece world. We see Big Mom using the Soru no Mi to interact with souls directly, ripping life force from people, implanting it into objects, creating homies. Brook himself uses his soul energy as a fighting technique. Soul-based attacks that literally burn through homies or freeze them. The series treats souls as something real, something that can be manipulated or weaponized. If that's the case, then a soul as powerful as Rox, backed by the abilities of the Yomi no Mi, could absolutely stick around long after his physical death. The fruit wouldn't just abandon him because the body was lost. The power would still be there, active in the soul itself. But without a vessel to return to, Rox would be a spirit looking for another way to complete his plan. And this is where the theory connects directly to Blackbeard. There's been a ton of speculation about Blackbeard's weird body. Marco himself points out that Blackbeard's body isn't like a normal person's, which is how he can handle 2 devil fruits. But what if it's not just about biology? What if Blackbeard's body is capable of housing more than one soul? What if that strange body is exactly what allowed Rox's lingering spirit to anchor itself to Blackbeard, either by choice or because Blackbeard himself sought out that connection? This isn't saying that Rox is fully in control of Blackbeard, like a puppet master, but imagine Blackbeard growing up filled with resentment and hate, being the perfect target for a vengeful spirit like Rox. A little whisper in his mind here and there, some dreams, maybe even visions of the world Rox wanted to create. Over time, those ideas take root. Blackbeard thinks they're his own ambitions, but really, they're a blend of his desires and Rox's unresolved will. And if Rox's soul really is inside him, even partially, that could explain how Blackbeard knew so much about the old era and the strategies that no one else seemed to have. But what about the Yomi no Mi itself? How could Brook have it now if Rox had it back then? That's actually one of the most clever parts of this theory. The Yomi no Mi doesn't activate until the user dies. That's the whole point. The revival only happens post-death. So when Brook died, his soul left his body and started looking for it again, but the fruit's ability kicked in at the moment of death. If Rox died at God Valley and his soul couldn't return because the body was destroyed, the same mechanism could have caused the fruit to reincarnate somewhere else. The fruit could be reborn while the original soul is still lingering, and the fact that Brook's body was lost at sea, just like Rox's might have been, makes their situations eerily similar. But even if the fruit was reborn, the power that Rox had already claimed as part of his soul wouldn't necessarily vanish. His soul could still retain some connection to the power, even if the fruit moved on to someone else. This might explain why the Yomi no Mi seems to have so much more potential than what Brook has shown us so far. Brook uses it mainly for his second life and a few soul-based attacks, but what if the fruit's true abilities are way deeper than that? What if, in the hands of someone like Rox, the fruit could do more? Like manipulating other souls, binding spirits, or even forcing possession. This could also explain why the Marines and the world government were so desperate to erase every trace of Rox in God Valley. It wasn't just about beating him in a fight, it was about making sure he couldn't come back. But maybe they failed, maybe they destroyed the island, killed the man, but underestimated the power of his fruit and the strength of his will. And now, 40 years later, Rox's ghost might be back in play without anyone realizing it, hidden inside the body of the man who seems most dedicated to picking up where Rox left off. Blackbeard's dream isn't to be Pirate King like Luffy or Roger, it's to rule the world, to dominate, to control. That's not a coincidence. That's exactly the dream Rox had. So whether Blackbeard knows it or not, whether Rox is consciously influencing him or just leaking his will into him through shared ambition, the result is the same. The nightmare of Rox XEBEC might not have died at God Valley. It might have just gone underground, waiting for the right vessel to carry on the plan. The scariest part of this theory is that if it's true, Blackbeard himself might not even realize how much of his own will is actually his. Imagine the horror of discovering that the goals you thought were your own have been shaped by a ghost whispering in your mind since childhood. Imagine realizing that your success, your strategies, your hunger for chaos and domination all came from the spirit of the man the world thought was dead and buried. That would add a whole other level of tragedy and horror to Blackbeard's character, turning him from just a villain into something way more complicated, a guy who might be as much victim as monster. It also would set up a chilling possibility for the final showdown in One Piece. What if defeating Blackbeard isn't just about beating him physically? What if Luffy and the others have to deal with the lingering soul of Rox itself? Maybe the final battle isn't just a clash of fists and haki, but also a fight to finally put down the will of a dead man who refused to die properly. Maybe that's what makes Blackbeard so much harder to kill than anyone else, because killing him isn't enough if the real threat is the thing hiding inside him. And if Oda wants to go really dark with it, he could even show that the reason Blackbeard has two devil fruits is because of this dual soul situation. Maybe it's not just biology, maybe Blackbeard can handle two fruits, because technically there are two entities living inside that body, each one tied to a different fruit, his own soul and Rox's ghost. That would explain why nobody else can pull off what Blackbeard does, because nobody else is carrying around the soul of one of the most dangerous pirates to ever live. This also ties into the larger themes of One Piece about inherited will. We always talk about the will of D as this noble thing, this symbol of freedom and rebellion against oppression. But what if inherited will works both ways? What if evil, domination, and control can be inherited too? Rox's will might be the dark mirror of the will of D, a corrupted version of that unstoppable spirit, and Blackbeard, whether willingly or not, could be the living proof of that. All of this would turn the concept of the will of the dead into a literal active force in the final saga. It wouldn't just be about history repeating itself metaphorically, it would be history literally coming back to haunt the living. In the end, this theory isn't just fun because it's spooky or supernatural. It works because it fits perfectly into the established world of One Piece. It uses the rules we already know. The way devil fruits work, the concept of souls, the cycle of death and rebirth, and it applies them to one of the biggest mysteries in the series in a way that explains so much of what we've seen without breaking the logic of the story. And if it's true, it means the fight against Blackbeard isn't just the fight against a pirate who wants power, it's the fight to finally put an end to Rox XEBEC's nightmare once and for all. One of the most interesting and surprisingly logical theories about Rox XEBEC is the one that suggests he might not have been the monster the world government made him out to be. The idea here is not that Rox was some misunderstood saint or secret hero, but that the story we've been told about him, the whole evil, world-dominating psycho who gathered the worst criminals to burn the world down narrative, might be only half the truth, if not a complete fabrication. What if Rox wasn't simply chasing power for power's sake? What if his real real motivation was to destroy the celestial dragons and the world government because he saw them for what they truly are, a corrupt, oppressive system built on the suffering of innocent people. This theory flips the entire view of Rox on its head. Instead of seeing him as the ultimate pirate villain, the theory suggests he might have actually been one of the earliest revolutionaries. Someone whose fight was against the ruling elite, the Celestial Dragons, and their twisted control over the world. But because history is written by the victors, what we know about Rox is likely what the world government wanted everyone to believe. After all, if you're the ones pulling the strings, it's a lot easier to justify wiping someone out if you convince the world they're pure evil. This idea makes way too much sense when you start looking at the context of the God Valley incident itself. God Valley wasn't just some random battlefield, it was a place where the Celestial Dragons were holding one of their infamous human hunts, those disgusting games where they literally hunt people like animals for sport. We know this because Oda confirmed that was happening at God Valley, and that's why Garp was even there in the first place, to protect the Tenryubito. But why would Rox specifically go to God Valley? The standard explanation is, he wanted to become king of the world, but that's too vague. If that was all he wanted, why show up at that exact moment, at that exact place, right when the Celestial Dragons were gathered together for their little sadistic festival? It makes way more sense that Rox went there to hit the system where it hurts. If your goal is to end the oppression caused by the Celestial Dragons, you don't just fight the Marines head on, you strike when the oppressors themselves are exposed. God Valley was basically a huge gathering of the top dogs of the world government, the perfect opportunity to cut off the head of the snake. If Rox's plan was to eliminate the Celestial Dragons directly, then suddenly everything about the God Valley incident takes on a whole new meaning. Think about the way the Marines have always tried to keep the truth about certain events hidden. The Void Century covered up, Ohara's research wiped out, the Will of D ? Still shrouded in mystery. So why wouldn't they do the same with Rox? If he wasn't just some power-hungry lunatic, but actually had a goal that would make people sympathize with him, like freeing slaves and ending the rule of the Tenryubito, then of course the government would spin the narrative. They'd make sure no one remembered him as anything but a tyrant. They'd make sure no one even dared to question their version of history. There's also the fact that none of the actual participants from that era have ever directly called Rox evil. When Sengoku explains the history of Rox, he says that Rox wanted to become king of the world, but he never really explains how or why. There's no detail about Rox's ideology from anyone who actually knew him. Garp, who was there, doesn't openly talk about what Rox did or said. Even Big Mom and Kaido, both former members of his crew, haven't given any personal testimony about what Rox was really like. The silence speaks volumes. If Rox was truly this psychotic madman, you'd think there'd be more first-hand accounts calling him out specifically. But instead, all we have is what the government tells us. This is where the theory becomes even more compelling. If Rox was targeting the Celestial Dragon specifically, it would mean his crew, as chaotic and unstable as it was more like an army of convenience. Maybe he wasn't best friends with Kaido, Big Mom, or Whitebeard. Maybe he simply gathered the strongest people he could find to break through the government's defenses and reach his real targets. If that's the case, then his crew was never about friendship or loyalty, which explains why they scattered so easily after his fall. They weren't united by ideals. They were united by a temporary goal, and once that goal was crushed, they had no reason to stick together. Now, here's where the theory starts to tie into the bigger themes of One Piece. If you look at what Dragon and the Revolutionary Army are doing right now, their mission is pretty much the same idea. Take down the Celestial Dragons, free the world from their control, expose the corruption of the world government. But Dragon's approach is slow, strategic, building alliances and resistance movements over time. Rox's approach. If this theory is true, Rox was the guy who tried to do it by brute force, by going straight for the heart of the problem all at once. The thing is, even if Rox had good intentions, his methods were probably violent as hell, and that's where this theory doesn't try to paint him as a perfect hero. Rox might have been ruthless, reckless, willing to do horrible things to achieve his goals, but the core of this idea is that his target wasn't the innocent people of the world. It was the rulers who enslaved and destroyed those people's lives. The victims of Rox's violence weren't the common folk, they were the elites who made the world into the nightmare that Luffy and the other D-Clan members are fighting against today. The Revolutionary Army and the D clan standing against the Celestial Dragons makes this idea feel even more plausible. If the D-Orse is tied to people who oppose the Celestial Dragons, it wouldn't be shocking if Rox, as a D, shared that same hatred for the world government's regime. His methods might have been wrong, but the goal itself, breaking the system, would line up perfectly with the deeper conflict that's been brewing throughout the entire story. If this theory is true, it also explains why Rox's name is erased from history, while Roger's isn't. Roger was dangerous, sure, but he wasn't directly trying to wipe out the Celestial Dragons. He found the One Piece and learned the truth about the world, but he didn't move to destroy the system. Rox, on the other hand, attacked the system at its core. He didn't just learn about the Void Century, wait, he actively tried to tear down the structure that covered it up. That's why Rox had to be erased completely, not just defeated, not just imprisoned. Erased? No one can be allowed to remember him as anything but a monster. And if you think about how often Oda plays with the idea of history being manipulated, this theory fits right into that pattern. The Void Century was wiped out of the records. The truth about Ohara was destroyed. The history of Joy Boy is still a mystery. Every time someone gets close to exposing the truth, the world government steps in to silence it. Why would it be any different with Rox? Another detail that adds weight to this theory is the way Oda has handled the portrayal of the Marines themselves. Garp is called a hero for what happened at God Valley, but we know Garp hates the Celestial Dragons. He refuses to become an admiral because he doesn't want to serve them. That's always felt like a weird contradiction. Why would the hero of the Marines despise the very people he supposedly protected at God Valley? But if Garp saw what was really going on, if he knew that Rox wasn't completely wrong about the Celestial Dragons, that could explain Garp's complicated feelings about the whole thing. This might also explain why Sengoku talks about Rox in such a strange, hesitant way. He doesn't sound like he's giving the whole story. He sounds like someone reciting the official line because that's all he's allowed to say. Sengoku is a good soldier, but he's also smart enough to question the system he works for. If he knows there's more to the story of Rox but can't say it out loud, that would make perfect sense. In the bigger picture, this theory makes Rox into a tragic figure. Not a pure hero, but someone whose fight against oppression was twisted into a story of villainy by the very people he tried to overthrow. And it fits so well with the overall theme of One Piece. The fight against oppression, the search for freedom, the clash between the rulers and the ruled. If Oda decides to reveal this twist, it would reshape how we understand the history of the One Piece world. It would turn Rox from a background villain into one of the key players in the story's central conflict. And it would show just how far the world government is willing to go to hide the truth. It would also give a lot more emotional weight to the final war that's coming, because if the truth about Rox comes out, if the world learns that he wasn't the monster they were told he was, it could ignite a whole new wave of rebellion. The people who are already starting to question the world government, like the people of Dressrosa, Wano, and other oppressed nations, would have even more reason to rise up. Rox could become a symbol, even in death, of what happens when you stand up to the people in power. In the end, this theory doesn't make Rox a saint. It doesn't excuse the blood on his hands, but it suggests that maybe, just maybe, the history we've been told isn't the full story. And if that's true, then the fight Luffy and his crew are caught up in now is just the latest chapter in a struggle that started long before they were born. A struggle that Rox might have been the first to fight, even if the world remembers him as a villain. The sixth theory about Rox D. XEBEC takes a turn into one of the more psychological and narrative-focused ideas out there, but it's one that the more you think about it, the more it makes scary sense. The core of the theory is that Rox might not just be connected to Blackbeard in the sense of he was an idol or Blackbeard is following his legacy, but that Blackbeard could actually be the reincarnation of Rox D. XEBEC, not possessed by him, not influenced by his ghost, but literally his soul reborn into a new body. Blackbeard is Rox, living his second life without consciously knowing it, or perhaps knowing it all along. This theory sounds crazy at first, but it actually ties into the central themes of One Piece better than you'd expect. Oda has always been playing with the concept of inherited will, with dreams that don't die even when the dreamer is gone. The D clan especially represents this idea that the flames of the will are passed down from one person to the next, generation after generation. But this theory pushes that idea a little further. What if sometimes that will isn't just inherited? What if in certain cases it's reborn directly through reincarnation? What if the strongest, most stubborn wills in the One Piece world don't just pass on their dreams? They come back back themselves, reborn into new vessels, whether intentionally or as part of some deeper law of the world. The key piece of this theory is the strange body that Blackbeard has. Marco points this out directly during the Marineford War. Blackbeard's body isn't like a normal human body. It allows him to hold more than one devil fruit. That alone is already one of the biggest mysteries in the series, because Oda has made it clear through various sources that the body cannot normally contain two devil fruits. But Blackbeard pulls it off like it was part of the plan all along. Fans have been theorizing about the nature of Blackbeard's body for years. Some say it's because he's a Cerberus model Zoan user. Some say he's a triplet fused into one being, and others lean toward the idea of him having multiple souls inside him. But this reincarnation theory offers another answer. What if Blackbeard's body is weird because it's not just Blackbeard's body? What if it's the reincarnated vessel of Rock's XEBEC? Reincarnation isn't something that One Piece has talked about directly very often, but it's hinted at through the concept of inherited will. When Doflamingo talks about the throne of the world always needing someone to sit on it, when Roger speaks about Joy Boy being someone from the future who will finish what he couldn't, the idea of people being chosen or meant to fulfill certain roles in history keeps coming up. Joy Boy himself is the best example, Luffy becoming the new Joy Boy through the awakening of his fruit. But Oda leaves the idea ambiguous enough that we don't know whether Joy Boy is just a title, a role, or an actual reincarnation. So if Joy Boy can be reborn through Luffy, why couldn't Rox be reborn through Blackbeard, a first to fight, even if the world remembers him as a villain? The parallel between Joy Boy and Rox here is critical. Joy Boy represents freedom, the smile, the liberation of the world. Rox is the opposite. Domination, control, darkness. Where Joy Boy brings life, Rox represents the void. And what's Blackbeard's fruit? The Yami no Mi, the darkness fruit, a Logia that represents the void itself, capable of absorbing light and other powers. Symbolically, this makes Blackbeard the perfect reincarnation of someone like Rox. The darkness fruit isn't just some random power Blackbeard stumbled into. It's the natural match for the rebirth of a man whose entire dream was to control the world under his shadow. Blackbeard's obsession with power also aligns perfectly with this idea. Most pirates in One Piece have dreams that go beyond just raw power. Luffy wants freedom. Roger wanted to see the world's secrets. Whitebeard wanted family. Even Kaido and Big Mom, as twisted as they were, had personal goals beyond just being strong. But Blackbeard, his dream is naked ambition. He wants to rise to the top at any cost. He's willing to use manipulation, betrayal, murder, and theft to get there. That's exactly the kind of ambition we'd expect from someone like Rox, whose goal was said to be world domination, not just Pirate King, king of everything. If Rox's dream was about crushing the celestial dragons and taking the throne of the world, Blackbeard's current moves align directly with continuing that same plan. Another piece of this theory that adds weight is the sheer amount of historical knowledge Blackbeard seems to have. He knows about the darkness fruit's true power, he knows how to hunt and steal devil fruits, he even seems to know about the meaning of the D in ways most characters don't. This isn't just a man who read a lot of history books. This feels like someone with insider knowledge, like someone whose past life memories might be surfacing without him fully understanding why. Or maybe he does understand. Maybe Blackbeard has known all along that he's the reincarnation of Rox, and that's why he moves through the world with so much confidence, like every step is part of a plan that's been playing out for decades. It's also interesting to consider Blackbeard's line about dreams. One of his most famous quotes is that a man's dream will never die. He says this in Jaya, and at the time it sounds like a beautiful sentiment, but if you read that line through the lens of reincarnation, it takes on a whole new meaning. It's not just about legacy, it's about the actual continuation of the dreamer through rebirth. Blackbeard might be living proof that some dreams refuse to die because the soul that carries them literally comes back. Now you might be wondering, how would reincarnation even work in the world of One Piece? There isn't a traditional reincarnation system explained in the series. No samsara, no wheel of life like in other anime. But there are a few key pieces of lore that suggest Oda might be leaving the door open for something like this. First, we know that devil fruits themselves carry some kind of essence or spirit. When a devil fruit user dies, the fruit's power reincarnates into another fruit nearby. So devil fruit powers already reincarnate. That's canon. If devil fruits can do it, why not souls? Especially powerful ones? Second, the idea of Haki is all about willpower, armament, judgment, observation, and especially Conqueror's Haki, the power to impose your will on others and on the world itself. Conqueror's Haki is often described as the power of kings, the ability to dominate not just physically, but spiritually. What if someone with a will strong enough to use Conqueror's Haki could leave an imprint so deep on the world that even death couldn't erase it? What if that will finds a way back into the world through reincarnation? Rox XEBEC, with his monstrous ambition and Conqueror's Haki, could easily be the kind of person whose will is too stubborn to die. If this theory is true, it also explains why Blackbeard feels so fundamentally different from the other villains in the series. Doflamingo, Crocodile, Kaido, Big Mom, they all feel like products of their environment, shaped by tragedy or greed. But Blackbeard moves like someone who was born for this role, someone whose hatred and ambition are older than his own life. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to destroy the old order completely and rebuild it in his image. That's not the goal of a man who just happens to be ambitious. That's the goal of someone carrying forward a dream from the past. The symbolic connection between Blackbeard and Rox also makes sense visually and thematically. Rox Jolly Roger, from the little we've seen, resembles a dark and ominous design. Very fitting for someone tied to the theme of darkness. Blackbeard's own ship is named the Saber of XEBEC. That's not subtle. You don't name your ship after a pirate from 40 years ago unless that pirate means something deeply personal to you. Most people name ships after personal symbols, people they admire, or dreams they're chasing. Blackbeard naming his ship after Rox feels almost like a declaration of identity. It also answers one of the weirdest questions about Blackbeard's rise to power. How did this nobody from Whitebeard's crew, someone who stayed in the shadows for decades, suddenly step up and start executing one of the most successful power grabs in history? Killing Thatch, stealing the Yami no Mi, turning an ace to gain Shichibukai's status, recruiting the worst criminals from Impel Down, snatching Whitebeard's Gura Gura no Mi. Every move was calculated, aggressive, and perfectly timed. That level of strategic brilliance doesn't feel like something Blackbeard just figured out on his own, but it makes perfect sense if he's the reincarnation of a pirate mastermind who already tried once to take the world. This reincarnation theory also makes Blackbeard's character arc much darker and more tragic. If Blackbeard is truly Rox reborn, there's a chance that his drive toward chaos and domination isn't entirely his own. Maybe part of him doesn't even fully understand why he wants what he wants. Or maybe he does, and that makes him even more terrifying. Either way, it paints Blackbeard as the ultimate embodiment of the idea that some dreams, especially the worst ones, are too stubborn to die. At the same time, this theory raises the stakes for Luffy's journey as well, because if Luffy is Joy Boy, the reborn symbol of freedom and liberation, then Blackbeard as the reincarnation of Rox would be the perfect opposite. Not just a rival pirate, but a literal reincarnation of the world's darkest ambition. Two souls from the past, reborn in the present, clashing for the future of the world. It's the perfect narrative symmetry. In the end, whether Oda confirms reincarnation outright or keeps it symbolic, the pieces are all there. Blackbeard's obsession with Rox, his strange body, his ruthless ambition, his connection to the darkness fruit, and his role as the ultimate foil to Luffy. All of it adds up to a much bigger story than just power-hungry pirate wants to be king. If this theory is right, Blackbeard isn't just continuing Rox's will. He is Rox, back for round 2, ready to finish the fight he lost at God Valley. And if that's true, then the real final war of One Piece won't just be about the living. It'll be about the unresolved battles of the dead, playing out through the next generation with the future of the entire world hanging in the balance. The central idea of this theory presents something that at first glance seems far-fetched, but with the arguments presented, it could make some sense. Monkey D. Dragon and Rox D. XEBEC might be the same person. In other words, the mysterious leader of the Revolutionary Army, known for challenging the world government, could actually be the legendary captain of the Rox Pirates, who decades ago terrorized the seas with a feared and powerful crew. The theory is based on the idea that although these two characters appear completely different in their circumstances and goals, there is a deeper connection that could link them. On one hand, we know that Rox was an ambitious pirate who directly confronted the Celestial Dragons and the world government, which is also a defining trait of Dragon's mission in the present. On the other hand, the fact that we have never seen Rox's face opens the door to all kinds of speculation about his true identity. The intriguing point here is not just the potential connection between these two characters, but also the fact that One Piece's narrative has portrayed Dragon as someone who operates in the shadows, leading a revolution revolutionary movement while little is known about his past. This, combined with the mystery surrounding Rox's disappearance at God Valley, creates the perfect space to consider that these two characters could be two sides of the same coin, with a drastic change in motivations and methods after that event. This premise raises important questions. What would cause someone like Rox to change course and become Dragon? What happened at God Valley that not only transformed him into a new figure, but also led him to completely conceal his previous identity? These are the mysteries that the theory seeks to explore, presenting the possibility that Dragon is the continuation of Rox, albeit with a renewed and perhaps redeemed focus. To understand why this theory holds some ground, we first need to delve into who Rox XEBEC was, and why his figure is so significant in the world of One Piece. This character led one of the most terrifying and powerful crews in history, the Rox Pirates, a group that, to give you an idea, included titans like Whitebeard, Kaido, Big Mom, Shiki, and even the infamous Captain John. In other words, not only was Rox feared, but he must have possessed extraordinary charisma and power to gather and command such monstrous individuals. The Rox crew was unlike any other. These pirates were not comrades, but a group of extremely ambitious individuals who worked together because they shared common interests, primarily power and treasure. However, their reign didn't last forever. 38 years ago, in a place known as God Valley, the crew was destroyed in an epic confrontation against Gall D. Roger and Monkey D. Garp, who temporarily allied to stop them. This event marked the end of the Rox Pirates, and it is presumed that Rox himself died in the battle, along with the disappearance of the island itself. What's curious is that, despite Rox's historical importance, we have never seen his face. All we have are silhouettes or vague details, but no clear image. This detail doesn't seem accidental, as in One Piece, the mystery surrounding certain characters often serves a narrative purpose. This has led to theories like this one, suggesting that Rox's identity might have been repurposed in some way, giving rise to someone new, Monkey D. Dragon. Another key detail is that, after the fall of the Rox Pirates, the remaining members went their separate ways and became legendary figures such as emperors and great pirates. However, there is virtually no record left of Rox himself. This reinforces the idea that if he survived, he must have gone into hiding or assumed a new identity, which aligns perfectly with the narrative of this theory. In summary, Rox was such a significant and feared figure that his mysterious disappearance, along with the fact that we have never seen his face, makes him the perfect candidate for the theory that he might have adopted a new life as Dragon, a man whose ideals seem to echo the ambitions Rox might have had at his peak. The theory doesn't stop at merely proposing the idea. It also attempts to justify how it could be possible for Rox and Dragon to be the same person. One of the key points it addresses is the age difference between the two characters, which initially seems problematic. Currently, it is known that Dragon is 55 years old, while the fall of the Rox Pirates occurred 38 years ago. This would mean Rox was 17 years old at the time, something that doesn't align with the idea of him leading such a powerful group of pirates at such a young age. To resolve this issue, the theory turns to Jewelry Bonnie's devil fruit, which allows her to alter a person's age. According to this hypothesis, during the battle at God Valley, Rox didn't die as believed. Instead, his age was reverted to 17 years old thanks to Bonnie's fruit, enabling him to disappear from the world government's radar. This would also explain why there is so little trace of his existence. If he was believed to be dead and physically unrecognizable, there would be no reason to continue searching for him. Another point that supports this idea is that Bonnie isn't the only user of a devil fruit with permanent age-related effects. Shinobu, for instance, has a fruit that can age objects and people irreversibly, leaving open the possibility that Rox's rejuvenation might also have been permanent. This would have given him the chance to start a new life under a different identity, that of Monkey D. Dragon. The theory also doesn't ignore the change in ideals. Rox was seen as ambitious, but his true motivations have not been revealed. The hypothesis suggests that his goals weren't as selfish as they seemed, and that he might have had intentions similar to Dragon's, overthrowing the world government and liberating the oppressed. The fall of his crew could have been the catalyst for reevaluating his approach, abandoning the pirate path to lead a global revolution under a new banner. In this context, Bonnie's devil fruit would not only explain the age discrepancy, but also serve as the starting point for Rox to transform into Dragon, the revolutionary we know today. One of the most intriguing aspects of this theory is how it addresses the relationship between Dragon and the monkey family, particularly his connection to Garp and Luffy. In One Piece, familial relationships are often a central theme, and this hypothesis attempts to provide an explanation that, while complex, aligns with the known pieces of the puzzle so far. The theory suggests that Dragon might not actually be Garp's biological son, which would explain why they don't resemble each other physically. Instead, it proposes that Garp had a daughter, Luffy's mother, who married Dragon. According to this idea, after Garp's daughter passed away, Dragon adopted the monkey surname as a symbolic gesture, maintaining the family lineage and carrying on the name. Another version of the theory suggests that Dragon might not even be Luffy's biological father, but rather an adoptive figure or someone who cared for him from afar. This would fit with the fact that Dragon was never present in Luffy's life, but still showed an interest in protecting him, such as when he sent Ivankov to Marineford to help save him. This type of relationship is compared to characters like Kuma and Bonnie, where there's no direct blood connection, but there is an emotional or moral bond driving their actions. These ideas also attempt to explain the physical and personality differences between Dragon and the other members of the monkey family. On one hand, Luffy and Garp are much more extroverted and carefree, while Dragon is reserved, serious, and strategic. This reinforces the notion that Dragon might not come directly from Garp's biological line, but has taken a place within the family due to external circumstances. Finally, these theories add another layer to the mystery surrounding Dragon, a character about whom very little is known. While the theory is speculative, it offers a possible reason for Dragon's distance from the monkey family and his almost obsessive focus on the revolution, a complex past as rocks, and the need to protect Luffy from the consequences of his actions. This, at the very least, would justify why Garp and Dragon appear to have a distant relationship and why Dragon has remained on the sidelines, both in his son's life and in his supposed father's. As with any theory, criticisms and doubts are inevitable, and this one is no exception. While the idea that Dragon and Rox XEBEC are the same person has some intriguing aspects, it also faces significant issues that are hard to overlook. Two of the most questioned points are the temporal inconsistencies and the family relationships. The first major obstacle is the issue of age. Although the theory attempts to justify Rox's rejuvenation through Jewelry Bonnie's devil fruit, this remains speculative. So far, it hasn't been confirmed in One Piece that the effects of her fruit can be permanent, especially when applied to someone else. Moreover, while the manga has shown other cases of abilities that alter age, such as Shinobu's fruit, it's unclear if these properties work similarly, leaving an important logical gap in this hypothesis. On the other hand, the mystery surrounding Dragon's family also raises unanswered questions. For instance, if Dragon isn't Garp's biological son, why would he carry his surname? And if he isn't Luffy's real father, how can his interest in protecting him be justified beyond a simple symbolic or moral bond? These narrative gaps are points that the theory tries to address, but doesn't manage to resolve convincingly, leaving room for its viability to be questioned. Another detail that complicates accepting this idea is Rox's character and ideals, which have been presented as ambitious and willing to work with extremely dangerous individuals to achieve his goals. Although the theory suggests that Rox might have had a more altruistic background, this seems to contradict the image the manga has built so far. Rox's transformation into Dragon would require not only a physical change, but also a radical personal evolution, something that, while possible, would be difficult to justify without resorting to forced explanations. Finally, the fact that Eiichiro Oda has never shown Rox's face or delved deeply into Dragon's past might simply be a narrative choice to maintain the mystery, without any direct connection between them. While the lack of details fuels theories like this, it could also mean that both stories are intended to develop independently. In conclusion, although the theory offers creative solutions to these inconsistencies, many of them feel too speculative and rely on assumptions that haven't been confirmed in the story. This doesn't completely invalidate the theory, but it does cast doubt on its viability within the One Piece canon. Honestly, this theory feels like a bit of a roller coaster to me. When I first heard it, I thought, wait, could this actually happen? The idea that Dragon and Rox might be the same person is definitely intriguing and even exciting, but I can't help but notice some issues that make me doubt it's something Oda would really do. On one hand, I can't deny that connecting two such mysterious characters has its appeal, thinking that someone like Rox, who led such a feared group of pirates, could have completely changed his life and become the revolutionary dragon is the kind of plot twist that would break the internet. Plus, the fact that we've never seen Rox's face and that Dragon's backstory is so unexplored makes the pieces seem to fit, at least on a surface level. It's one of those moments where you think, maybe there's something there. However, being realistic, I feel like there are too many things that don't quite add up. For example, the idea of rejuvenation with Bonnie's fruit feels a bit too forced. Sure, in the world of One Piece, anything is possible, but it's hard for me to imagine Oda using something so specific to justify this connection. And if rocks really did have ideals so similar to dragons, why would he have associated with such ruthless pirates like Big Mom or Kaido? That part always leaves me scratching my head. Then there's the family aspect. To me, one of the most important elements in One Piece is how relationships between characters are handled, especially family bonds. If Dragon isn't really Garp's son, or if his connection to Luffy is more symbolic than biological, wouldn't that have been hinted at more clearly by now? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it feels like a big departure from what the manga has shown us so far. Despite all this, I have to admit I love the idea of Oda surprising us with something like this. I can already imagine the uproar in the community if it turns out that Dragon and Rocks are the same person. It would be insane. Even though I personally don't think it's something that will happen, I wouldn't mind at all if Oda decided to include this twist, as long as it's done in a way that doesn't feel forced or like a cheap plot device. In conclusion, I think this theory is more of a fun exercise for fans than something that's actually going to happen in the story. But hey, with Oda, you never know. For now, I'm choosing to stay skeptical but open to being surprised. Who knows? Maybe we're closer to a giant revelation than we think. Look, to be honest, after going through the entire theory, I'm torn. On one hand, I can't deny that it has some interesting points, but on the other, it feels like there are way too many loose ends. Now, if we're talking about the actual likelihood of this happening in One Piece, I'd say it's pretty low. But then again, we're talking about Eiichiro Oda, and he's capable of surprising us in ways no one expects. The first thing that comes to mind is that, for this theory to work, Oda would have to weave everything together with surgical precision. Connecting Rocks and Dragon as the same person would mean rewriting a significant part of One Piece's history, not just the events at God Valley, but also how the characters have been portrayed up until now. Honestly, I'm not sure if it'd be worth complicating things that much when the story is already rich and compelling on its own. Also, when I think about it logically, Dragon has all the potential to be an incredible character without needing to be the rejuvenated version of Rocks. He's a revolutionary leader, someone who challenges the world government and has built a movement capable of changing the world. That alone makes him fascinating enough without adding such a convoluted connection to Rocks. For me, it would be far more impactful to see how Oda develops his story independently, diving into his relationships with Luffy, Garp, and the Revolutionary Army. That said, I won't lie. If Oda decided this theory was true, it would be a massive shock. Imagine the fan reaction to discovering that Dragon has been Rocks all along. It would be one of those jaw-dropping moments that everyone talks about for weeks, but it would have to be executed perfectly, because otherwise, it could feel like an unnecessary twist or a cheap way to surprise the audience. In the end, while I'd love to see Oda pull off something like this, I still think it's unlikely. This theory has intriguing ideas, but it also leans heavily on speculation and tying together loose ends that maybe don't need to be tied. Personally, I'd rather enjoy the mystery surrounding Dragon and Rocks as separate characters, but hey, if this turns out to be true, I'm not going to complain. On the contrary, I'll be there enjoying the chaos this would cause in the community. Who knows what else Oda has up his sleeve? And that's it for the 7 theories about the character Rocks XEBEC in One Piece. Which one was your favorite? Which one do you believe the most? Let me know down in the comments. And remember, if you enjoyed the video, you can hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to help me reach 5,000 subscribers and make my dream come true. Big hugs, and I'll see you in the next video.